are called to order, and if you would all stand with me, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance, which is hiding behind the screen, but it is there.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Superintendent, we will turn it right over to you.
Thank you. Hello. Good to see everybody again. And so we have a busy, kind of a three-pronged attack today at the work session, and wanted to do it now at the beginning of the month because we'll be preparing student handbooks for next year. We've got information from the state legislatures complete. And so we wanted to go over some information with the board and have about 3 presentations made regarding that. A little bit behind. Okay, so next month I'll be bringing my goals to you and where we are, but this is part of that process, not because it was tied into my goals, but it's really a 2-for-1 where we have the state law, state statutes, and particularly today we'll be talking about safe, secure campuses and social, emotional, some needs where we're going to tie into some issues. One of the things that has affected us this year is our policies regarding with first offense on marijuana. So we want to talk. I really want to hear from the board today on that. We have students vaping. We have first offense. We have Del Cassens is filling up, and it's put a strain on the resources there. We also have our youngest kids that are bringing some, some really behaviors, and you're all aware of it. The behaviors that are coming, and it's very difficult. So we want to really talk to the board about a proposal and a plan of action that we would have, get the board's feedback on that, and then be able to move forward after that. So we'll start first with Vern, not with Vern. I've been sick, so that's Bill on the light right there. So if with Bill, and then John will come up, and then Helen will come up. And then when that part is closed, then I want to talk a little bit, just very, very briefly. We want to be done by 4:30, so give us a 30-minute break between meetings. A little bit about the Citizens Oversight Committee, and just make some, just talk to you all about that, maybe make a couple recommendations and see where the board wants to go. Bill?
Try my best with this to see if I can keep it working. Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about this proposed change and the way in which we deal with students and the consequence we provide for students with a first-time marijuana use in the district. I wanted to just walk you through currently the practices that we follow within the district, and then the rationale for bringing forth a change to this and what it would look like for us as we begin this process. Currently, we follow the Code of Student Conduct, which is established for all children and families. We have definitions in the Code of Student Conduct that align perfectly with the school environmental safety incident reporting, which we're required to do, and every district in Florida is required to do. Level 4 violations are our most severe violations that we have to the Code of Conduct, and drug use, which would encompass marijuana, is a level 4 violation to the Code of Conduct. Every time that a student is caught using this and they are given a consequence for doing so, that is reported to law enforcement, must be reported to law enforcement, and also must be entered in as a level 4 violation and also reported as assessor incident that is reported to the Department of Education. All of that remains the same. We're proposing no changes to that. We would not be able to change the level 4 violations for that. But looking at the information that we have here, the total number of cases over the last 3 years, in 2016-17, there were 49 children that were involved in 55 children that were involved in 49 instances of marijuana first-time use. In 17-18, there were 76 students that were involved. And then this year, 18-19, and this is based on data from 4/23 of this school year, there were 113 of those first-time users. When we look at that, it translates into what we do with first-time users following our current practice is that they are automatically assigned to an alternative placement if the proof is there that they were under the influence or in possession of a drug or marijuana. Currently, there's 77 of those kids that are at Dalcassins at this point in time in the alternative facility. There are 2 of them that are in PACE, 3 of them that are in Acceleration Academy, and 1 at Performance Base Academy. So a total of 84 students that were automatically assigned. Other students that were in that number could have been students that had a second offense as well. But these kids are first-time, what we're talking about is first-time users of this. When we're looking at the makeup of the students, I have a hard time with the clicker, we look at what this looks like for race and gender, and we see that there are 30 of these students that were identified as Black, 20 Hispanic, 3 of them are multi-races, 24 of them were white, for a total of that 77. I'm only looking at the placement at Dalcassins at this point in time. The current practice that we follow is that there's a consequence that results in the recommendation by the principal for expulsion from school. The cases are then heard before a placement review committee, which is a district-level committee that is made up of the director of alternative education, the principal of Dalcassin School, the director of student services, one of the executive directors that supervises principals, and others as deemed necessary. If it is proven that the child is in possession or has used the drug, the most common consequence is that the student is offered a stipulated order in lieu of expulsion, and then they're immediately assigned to an alternative facility. If the student and the family accept that stipulated order in lieu of expulsion, then that alternative facility setting becomes the natural place for the student. They must remain there for a semester or longer, depending on the time that this occurred in the year. And also, if the family refuses to sign that stipulated order, then the child must go forward with a hearing before a hearing officer, which is an outside hearing officer that we bring in to hear the case and the evidence presented by the family and the school system. Our proposed change at this point in time, and I'm going to get to that in just a second, only affects the consequence for first-time marijuana users. It's not a change to the definition, and it would be no change to the student code of conduct. For the first-time offenders or first-time possession of marijuana, the disciplinary process would remain exactly the same. The principal would continue to make the recommendation for expulsion. The case would be heard before the placement review committee. It's that placement review committee that would then have some discretion after the investigations conducted by the school. All of the evidence is there to make a determination in that stipulated order to send that child back to their school of origin, but with the stipulation that they must participate in drug abuse or substance misuse counseling. And we get to set the timeline on that, which would be 8 to 12 sessions that the child would be required to participate in. And also, the first of those sessions would require the parent to be a part of that as well. We feel like this would align the consequence for this behavior more to the behavior itself in order to try to bring about a change, instead of just simply assigning them to an alternative setting, but instead make something that has meat attached to this, that they would have to participate in that counseling to try to bring about the prevention and to end this cycle that they may have found themselves getting into at this point in time in such an early part of their high school career or their school career. For any student that is arrested in this or because this is a level 4 violation to the Code of Conduct and automatically involves reporting to law enforcement. If they are given a civil citation or they are recommended for a diversion program, they must still adhere to all requirements of that program as well. There is nothing that we would do in any way, shape, or form to veer away from those requirements. It is still required to be reported as a assessor violation, and that data is collected in Survey 5 and is sent to the Department of Education. The parents of students who are provided this stipulated order with the option of returning to the school or the current school of enrollment, they must sign that stipulated order and ensure that the child complies with all requirements of the order, and failure to sign it or failure to comply with it would result in automatic placement at the alternative school. We also have a separate code in the Code of Conduct for drug sale or distribution. There would be no changes recommended for that or for the consequence associated with that. Any student that was selling drugs or distributing drugs would still be automatically brought forth with a recommendation for expulsion, and in many cases, instead of the assignment to alternative setting, those kids are automatically brought before the board depending on the violation and the amount that they have. The rationale that we're looking at for bringing about this change at this point in time, it aligns the process that we have currently in place for tobacco and alcohol. We do not send kids for their first time alcohol abuse to an alternative setting. It aligns with current practices that other school districts in Florida are currently doing. It allows the student to remain current with their course of study on their comprehensive campus without having to remove them to an alternative setting, and many times having to break the flow in their educational program while they're in that alternative setting. And most importantly, it provides a consequence that is better suited to the violation to the Code of Conduct by having them participate in that substance abuse counseling. And it provides the child an opportunity to learn to regulate their behavior by making them fully aware of the consequences further down the line for what they're beginning to do with the use of marijuana. And it also would then open up other seats in the alternative setting for those kids that cannot get placed in an alternative setting at this point in time due to these large numbers. I just gave you a little breakdown on the next slide of what the practice looks like in other districts. In Martin, they've had for a long time a REACH program for all of these level violations, and the children automatically have to participate in that REACH program. In Palm Beach, it's a first-time offense. There's not a recommendation for expulsion. They're given 5 days of out-of-school suspension, and if they agree to the substance abuse counseling, they could then have 3 of those days placed in abeyance, and they must participate in whatever is set aside for that counseling program. Indian River is up to a 10-day suspension with a referral to the Substance Abuse Center and a stipulated order, but students are returned to their campus of their origin where this originated. In Duval County, it was a 3-day suspension and a referral to a nighttime substance abuse program, and that program is actually taught by their student services staff, their social workers and school psychologists, which is something we're looking at as well with this. And in Okeechobee, first-time marijuana users, they're sent to the alternative school for 9 weeks, but they must participate in the Too Good for Drugs program and also another program. The questions have been coming up. Would this include vaping? Yes, it automatically includes vaping. That is where it's almost to the level of epidemic proportions, what we're starting to see with young people. We've been working with the Department of Health, having them do presentations and training in our schools, and this is something we need to look at more as a community event in order to help people, families understand what all is associated with this and how easy this is for their children to begin to access this material. If they are caught vaping and the apparatus that they're using tests positive for marijuana and the investigation reveals that this is a first-time offense, student would still be afforded that stipulated order with the same provisions and allowed to return to their school of origin. If they violate that, it would automatically go back before the placement review for assignment in the alternative setting. And the question of what plans do we have for extending drug prevention or intervention programs to address this issue, I've been working with John Fowler from Drug Abuse Treatment Association to see about getting more substance abuse counselors in our schools. We already have 8 in our Project Success that are covering the schools we have now, but he and I both know that's not enough, and we are looking at that. He's addressing the managing entity to ask for more funding to expand that program. But in the meantime, if we're not able to get those, then we do have a secondary plan where we would look at our own staff to run those programs of the evening for students that would also involve their parents being a participant in that. We're looking for this to take effect for the 1920 school year. And then that question, what about kids that are already in the alternative setting? Would this apply to them? This would be brand new, so it would not go back years past or start looking at other kids that have violated the code of conduct. This would be fresh at the beginning of the school year. Questions you may have?
Just looking at your slides, so we're not having any suspension for our students?
They're still going to be suspended when this first comes up. What we're trying to do is to be able to reduce that. Normally, if they are caught, the placement review package must arrive in the Director of Alternative Education office by Thursday afternoon. They are heard before placement review on Tuesday. Based on that decision on Tuesday, they could return back to school immediately. So this should reduce the number of days that they're out of school. But there would still be a suspension from school for this.
Okay, because I just didn't see it.
I'm sorry, yes.
No, that's fine. I understand the process, but why is there a process? Why can't the principal just decide, we're going to put you in this program, check you off, and say, you got to go to the drug substance because we want it to be, we want it to have a lasting impact in the student for this process? Because it sounds like more work for the administrators, knowing that the kid's not going to get suspended, that they're going to be put in this drug thing, and that it seems like more of a checklist for the administrator than for the kid, the student.
I don't think anything is changing whatsoever for the practice that the administrator has already been following.
I know that was my point.
Yeah.
It's still, you already know the desired outcome is that they're going to go into drug rehab for 6 or 8 sessions. So why put them through that? Why don't we change it? Systematic order? You see what I'm saying is, if I already knew the desired outcome, why would I put an administrator through this, another meeting for this?
I think the best way I can answer that, and Helen, Dr. Wild and Dr. Prince can add to that, but we had to have a starting point somewhere with this because this is a total change for what we've been doing in this district. We're one of the only districts that continue to recommend kids for expulsion for this process.
Yeah, it's different, and we have the toughest penalty. So it's first off, I think it's important. This is not about kids that are dealing. This is not about that. This is first time users, offenders.
It's like smoking a cigarette.
Exactly.
Smoke a cigarette,
Exactly.
But we don't put them up for expulsion, though, is what I'm saying.
Right.
That's
so
what I'm saying.
we met with we want to make sure that I think communication on this is so crucial that no one gets the thought that we're being lenient. Where we're coming from is really just, and I'm going to get to where you're at, is to try to offer support and help for the child as opposed to just put, not that they're not going to get it someplace else, but on a first-time offense, if we have parents involved where they're going to counseling with them and the student is there, and then the child's going to have to continue that, I'm open. This is not etched in stone. We're open to options. That's why we wanted to bring it to the board now to really have a nice discussion on that, because the principals themselves were a little concerned that would this open, floodgates kind of where they'll look at a child. This offense has to be handled on its own. It can't be tied into other offenses. So if it's a chronic troublemaker, well, here's my chance to get that guy off campus, which sometimes people think that way. We kind of bringing it to the board more as how do we help the child? We have to do on the vaping piece and others, we're going to have to do a countywide campaign, working with our local providers, the health department, the resources that we have here, probably this summer and then going into next school year. That's something we can talk about later on, because that's not just a St. Lucie issue. You see that every day for that. But with this, Troy, that's one of the issues that we talked about. Would the system and the community be able to handle that much of a major shift like this? Do we come in at this angle and maybe come back in another year and revisit it and say, okay, how did the first year go? But personally, I'm wide open to that, because you have exactly what you said, you have your desired outcome, you know what that is. Why go through all these other steps? We want to make sure that the principals are comfortable, that the system itself is working. But this is I don't want to say draft. This is not etched in stone in any way. We really want to have this conversation with the board to see where the board was, and then after this meeting, massage it however we would need to massage it, and then bring it back.
And if we might add to that, this transition process still does involve the stipulated order, so the parent is acknowledging that this did happen, which helps the student take responsibility for it, and the parent then has a full understanding that they must ensure that their child follow through with the counseling, because our goal is to make sure that they do that, because we're trying to really change behavior.
And if it's violated.
And if it's violated, there will be the next level of consequence, which would be the alternative.
It's no longer expulsion, it's 10-day, is it 10-day, 5-day suspension?
They're still signing that they have committed an expellable offense, but they are agreeing to go to this alternative pathway instead to receive the counseling. If they don't follow through with that agreement, then they are still alternatively assigned after that.
So if they do, then how many days of suspension do they receive?
Normally, it is up to 10 days. It depends on the principal. They have the option of up to 10 days, as is written in the Code of Conduct for that.
So the placement review would discuss the circumstances around that individual case and may very well say, it happened on Thursday, today's Tuesday, let's let them go back to school tomorrow. They've agreed to go to counseling. It was a discrete incident. It wasn't in the newspaper. Every case is so different. This gives a review committee the opportunity to look at all the facts.
Personally, I think suspending a kid for more than 3 days is harsh. It's more of a vacation at a high school level. You get backed up academically. 10 days is a nightmare to make up. I haven't seen anything punitive for the child. Let's say if he doesn't complete drug court, obviously take away student privileges. I would probably would like to see that in there. Suspend academic, suspend athletics, suspend.
They go to alternative site if they don't complete it.
Okay, well, I mean,
So,
because you give them a certain time period.
I think nothing changes with the policy, except it goes to placement review, and the student gets an option for a stipulated order. And that team of people, along with the school administrators, can make the decision: is the alternative setting more appropriate? Or is it more appropriate to send the child back to school under these conditions that the parent agrees on, okay, with going to the counseling and the drug treatment? But that stipulated order is signed so that if that is violated, then if you violate the stipulated order, let's say you get another offense, or you don't go to the drug treatment, then immediately you would be assigned to the alternative program. So what we've done is we've created a process where we intervene to try to get assistance and support the child, but they have to check those boxes and they have to make sure they comply with the stipulated order, or what would have occurred before, where they didn't get that first opportunity, they would go to the alternative site. So that's why the principal doesn't arbitrarily make that decision. We have a process and an agreement in place where the parents are involved and they sign that, so that, and they have skin in the game, so that the child does not participate in the drug treatment, then they would be, they violate the stipulated order and would be assigned to the alternative setting. And I think that
No, I
answer.
disagree, but it's fine.
Okay.
I hear what you're saying. I just think, I think if you already know, the principal is going to say, well, this is what's going to happen. You're going to go to this meeting, and we're going to recommend this, and you're going to have to sign this, and we're all going to have to go to this meeting. I understand that. But if I already knew that I was going to get counseling going to this meeting, it's like, okay, it's just more work for other people.
So what some districts do, it's in the hands of the principal. Okay, so it doesn't go it doesn't go further than the principal, but the policy itself is the same for everybody. So it's the first time abuse. The principal knows, everybody knows that you're going to get, if it's 5 days or whatever, you're going to get that. You can get 3 days or 2 days in abeyance. You're still going to get the 3, but you enroll in the counseling, whatever that looks like, and then at the school setting. And it doesn't get, I think that's what you're saying. And then they handle that. They handle it. It stays there. And then if the conditions aren't met, then it becomes, then it goes to the next level. So as opposed to doing a stipulated order or anything like that, we would have to change the code of conduct, which is doable. Like I said, I think this is the conversation to have, to talk about that, because we're not.
Do you
Yeah.
show up?
I'm not over it any longer, but Helen and
We
Did
rotate.
Bill say he wanted
But
to?
my point
and I
is I
wanted to-
have a lot of people coming
Right.
into this meeting for a kid that just smoked a joint in the bathroom that he's going to get, we
But
already know what the outcome is.
Right, but just a couple of things. When we talk to the principals about that, principals don't necessarily want to make that decision, because some kids so is the principal going to make a decision? What the placement review committee allows us to do also is there could be other mitigating factors where we say, okay, the alternative setting is the right thing to do for this child. You know what I mean? So it provides options for us. There could be circumstances where we think the alternative setting might be the most appropriate, but it's a group effort and a group conversation, so that just one person's not making that decision.
But again, if that was, if the principal has the, which they do by state law, that's their authority to make the recommendation, only they can. And if they choose that I need to take it forward because of extenuating circumstances, then that's one path. If they say, no, this was so-and-so's first time, blah, 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 I have the option to do this. So then they have two paths, as opposed to everybody taking the same path, when one may they're different. No cases are
Talking about
alike.
77 meetings this year just for smoking marijuana once. That would have been cut out.
Well, we're already meeting
That's
anyway.
the desired
Yeah,
income.
I just want to throw this out there. We're
I mean,
already,
because that's the numbers you gave me.
yeah, but we're already having the meetings weekly anyway.
Every Tuesday.
That's just one,
I know, but if you cut all that time out.
yeah. I
Plus,
mean,
they're filling out the paperwork. That was my point.
I think part of what we're trying to get to,
No,
and we may get there eventually to where you're going, is to have some starting point, because we've been at the most severe end of this as a consequence for so long, and now to make a sudden change without doing a gradual release of this, it didn't seem to be the right time to do that we wanted to. That's why we sought the input of the principals, to have them tell us, does this seem like there's something that you think we should be moving toward? We did get a unanimous vote for that. We did get feedback of how they feel that there needs to be more education brought into the middle school setting, and especially to work with middle school parents so they fully understand, and then about what we need to do as a community to really address the issues that are coming forward with the vaping and all of those other things. So this was our first attempt at this, to roll it out, and then next year come back, look at our data. Is this something that is working, or could we follow something similar to what is happening in Palm Beach, where it is the principal gives the recommendation, and it's not a recommendation for expulsion on the first attempt.
Over the course of time. So it gives an extra layer of accountability, but it also gives an extra layer of support to the principal, because we all know there's students that would try the principal, just let me slide this time, let me not, get, But the principal has the ability to say, no, this goes to this group. It's not my decision alone. And I think when there's a transition like that, that we give the principals all the support they need in these circumstances as well. And we may very well find that as the process goes on, we can lighten it some. I think we would just be shifting some of the extra work from the review task force back to the principal. And I'm pretty sure they've got enough on their plate right now as it is. But
I think it takes work off the principal not having to fill out all this stuff. Because most of the times when they go to these orders, it's normally the dean or somebody else goes, right?
We don't ask the principals to attend anymore. They do it by phone. So they just call in by themselves or with a team, depending, that's their choice. Either way, they would produce the same amount of evidence. They still have to prove their case. They still have to do a good investigation. We want to make sure that the students get their due process. So it's about the same amount of work for the principal. They're going to just have to meet with the parent by themselves and make the decision on their own if we go all the way to the other path.
Okay. Sorry. No, I appreciate the work that you've done on this. I think we're in new territory. I mean, even the state of Florida is kind of in flux. We have kids that have marijuana cards, and I guess they can take the pills, and they can, I mean, we are in a point when everything is evolving and changing, and I like that you have looked at this, and I appreciate it, because we're talking about some 11, 12, 13-year-old children. These aren't really mature, if you could call teenagers mature, but it's not so much looking at 17, 18, 19-year-olds. I'm really concerned with the younger teenagers that might have just started down that road. The other problem, and I'm going to say, is some of the parents at home are doing this at home, and so the students are seeing the parents that are freely, and the parent may have a marijuana card. It might be legal. I'm not saying the parent is doing this illegally, but we do know that kids are going to see a model at home and possibly bring that in. So that's a concern as well. But the sooner we start with some type of intervention, the better. And I do agree with Troy. I think that the 10 days out of school is not a good model. I mean, more than 3 days is really hurting the student academically, trying to catch up, even for our students that are sick. It's very hard for them, especially if they're at higher level academic courses. So I would really like to look at, you know, personally 3 days, but I appreciate this so much, because I think it's come to the point we have to do something different than what we have been doing. So thank you.
This is just risky behavior in general, right? So if we're going to make them do something with the hazards of, was it demon reefer from the 1930s, then we need to probably very much have a discussion about making the correct choices as part of that. Not just focus on this one issue, but making correct choices, because we know a lot of these kids, as Ms. Hilson said, are not going to have an appropriate role model at home to help them make the right choices. So exposing them to the broad scope of best choices, I think, should be part of this curriculum. And if we're going to do it in-house, that means you can tailor it. And we don't have enough people to do that, I know. Okay, but you're working with the Southeast Behavioral Health Network?
Working with John Fowler from
Okay.
DANA, Drug Abuse Treatment
So
Association.
there should be some level of support to be able to fill those gaps. Okay.
And part of, you know, it aligns perfectly with what we're already trying to do under social and emotional, to really increase self-awareness for kids and get them on a path of regulating their behavior. Because everything you've said about suspension of kids it doesn't do anything good for them whatsoever. So if we can avoid that, and again, the principal has the discretion. When this incident comes, they can give 1 day, they can give 2, they can give up to 10. It's entirely up to the principal. Nothing has changed, correct? Thank you.
Other questions? concerns? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me, no, not at all. So what I think I'm hearing then is we'll do the process as we're presenting it to you. This will be a one-year pilot, okay? And we'll monitor it. And maybe after 6 months, we're ready to come before the board. And then look at I really want to get with staff and principals and talk about the 10 days itself, because it's part of the code of conduct. And maybe we can do something there so that then if this is going to be a mandatory stipulated order that would go before the crew, try to get the student back in, but the thing that we will not, that there must be the mental health piece in there, the counseling with the families, which may or may not, you never know. There could be the miracle story where that's what starts it for the family to get back on track. We always hear them. And, and then work with that process, but that it's not an automatic Dale Cassins, we're going to come back to school. And what's built into it as well, they're almost like on a behavioral contract as other students, that if there's another offense, if there was a secondary offense, I believe another level 4, they were going to be heading over, or 3 or a level 3 or 4. So the student has an opportunity, a second chance, if you will. And we can then kind of monitor that, do the data this year, come back to the board sometime during the year, maybe in the spring, to see what our data is showing, what we're, how it's working out. The other issue I was expecting the board to maybe bring up, and I'm going to bring it up because staff doesn't know it, but I like doing this. The students that have already, nobody's been grandfathered in. So if it happens to me today, then I'm there, and I'm there for a year, for the school center. And I know we'd had those conversations, but the more I've thought about this, it's to maybe take a look at that as well, because then you're coming back fresh on a new school year, and the possibility of meeting with those kids, going through the same process, even though I know we didn't have that conversation yet with the principals, to go through the same process so that everybody starts out the new year on a if it happened to me in February, I don't come back till February, correct?
They don't have to stay a
No.
full year. They have to stay a maximum of 1 semester.
Right.
Currently is the process.
And some of the concern, particularly from the middle school, the K-8 principals, is exactly what Ms. Hilson was talking about, the younger ones. And they felt like we can do more here for them than anybody else can, that kind of concept. So we can go back. What I'd like to do is go back and take a look at that as well. And if there's no objection to the board,
You have the privilege or the obligation for student assignment.
correct, I know
So, so you can
Yeah.
inform us, but on some of these things, you can actually make the
that.
judgment.
So if I don't, because I'm not seeing any, I'm kind of picking up a consensus here even on that. So, okay, all right, very good.
Well, I think it's very important also that we have, if it's first time offense and it's going to be suspension, that it's basically across the board and not, shortened, for the stipulation. So if we shorten it to like 3 days across the board, so that one child is not getting any type of special, it's for this particular offense, not other offenses that they might have done. So looking at just this one particular offense, having it across the board, if it's a 3-day suspension, if it's a 1-day, if it's a 2-day, and I like the part of definitely giving a second chance, because children act, but they have to have some sort of consequence. Otherwise, they do it over and over. So there's got to be something where the child feels it, the parent feels it, but at the same time, we're helping the child as well.
You're comfortable to proceed then with consensus in the
Just a
conversation today?
response. Yeah, just a response. On each, no matter what the offense is, we need to allow our principals the discretion to make whatever they think is the best choice. And when I say that the principal, the dean or the AP, because we do a lot of training on that, and we do a lot of monitoring on that as well, to see, within a particular school, some schools have 2 deans. Is one dean, are they consistent? Then fairness. I think that's what you're talking about, the consistency and the fairness of that. So you would have to look at that so that the principal, handles each case is handled on its own merit and based upon what's occurred with that. And then whatever the consequence is what it is. What's important to me, and I know it's important to the board, is that we get the counseling piece in there right away for them, and then give them another opportunity. Right, yeah, that it's consistent, yeah, and that's what we'll do. Okay, thank you. We're going to shift to the second phase, which I know that the board has been, we talked a little bit about it yesterday at the Tri-County work session regarding the grand jury report. So we kind of wanted to go to the board. You're kind of aware of what we've done, but we want to just publicly talk about where we are, what we've done, assure the board, assure the community that we're in good shape, and that we're adhering to the state statutes, we're adhering to the law, and most importantly, protecting our students and staff members, and give you an overview of where we are right now. Dr. Prince.
Okay, welcome, Madam Chair and Board, Superintendent Gent. A lot of this is going to be a review, but this is kind of an accumulation as we, with regards to the grand jury and the grand jury that has been impaneled. So I wanted you to be armed with basically everything we've done and also what the grand jury is addressing so that you are able to answer any questions you may have. So Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, is crazy to think that it was Valentine's Day over a year ago, February 14, 2018. And I think one of the most disappointing, and we've seen the video that we shared with you a few months ago, is the failure of the adults resulted in the loss of life and resulted in the loss of life for our kids. So the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, basically what they found, and I'll go through this very quickly, no code red policy, no training, multiple people failed to act, there weren't drills, regular drills enacted each year. Also, on a training piece, even if someone had called a code red, no one knew who could call it. There was not adequate training with regards to how to handle an active assailant. So I'm just going to go through kind of what we've done with safety and security since 2019. We've revised our code red training and code red drills based on the new legislation. We've implemented the run, hide, fight training, and that's based on input from law enforcement and even our local law enforcement, school district staff, and security. So far, we've conducted 55 trainings and 67 code red drills. Also, I wanted to add, with regards to the code red drills, some of those drills have been during transition. They've also been during fire alarms, when we've pulled the fire alarm and then run the code red, so the kids are conditioned to do the right thing, and also the staff knows what to do if the fire alarm's been pulled and then there's a code red announcement, and how the kids and the staff should handle that. We've done train the trainer courses, which are the run, hide, fight, training people on staff so that they can also train staff and students, and those trainings take about 2 to 4 hours long. I just wanted to also tell you that the legislation is critically important and education is critically important, but there is a time expenditure attached to these, how much time it takes for us and staff to train our staff on these important items. So the armed aggressor training of staff and code red drills, these have been implemented, and training includes any staff member can call a code red and all classroom doors must be locked at all times. Now we're implementing, and this will roll out in August, is the Volo app. Mr. Terrence and I shared that with you, and that's the geofencing app. That we've already purchased that. That'll be up and online in August, so that anyone will be able to call that code red from their phones. And also, whenever we visit the schools, and we also, in our principal trainings, to tell our principals regularly go around and have staff check doors to ensure that they're locked, just so that they're complying with those things. Also, with regards to gates, making sure our gates are locked. Even facilities and maintenance is notifying us whenever they pull up on a school in the back and there's a gate unlocked or there's a gate open. We're notified and we take action on those. We've also established new code red and code yellow protocols and implemented new training and drill protocols. All schools, and we addressed this at the last workshop, have an operational security camera system, and we're addressing those. We have issues all the time where the lenses get fuzzy and we've got to go out and fix those. We've created threat assessment teams on all school campuses. These threat assessment teams are designed to look for at-risk factors of our kids that may be exhibiting behavior that's threatening to other students. And then we assign the threat assessment teams to see what supports we can provide to those kids. We entered into an MOU with Sandy Hook Promise for training of school-based threat assessment teams. So far, we've trained 217 school-based threat assessment team members on the Virginia model of threat assessment, and that is a 7-hour training that all of our threat assessment team members have to go through. And we've completed and submitted to the FDOE the FSSAT school security risk, and that's the top of the next slide. That was completed on all 42 schools, and the due date was August, and they've actually given us some additional time to complete that with the new legislation. It's now October. New door entry protocols for school campuses were implemented district-wide, and these protocols require the visitor to identify themselves and state their purpose of visit before being buzzed in. Mr. Tomlinson's been instrumental in getting the Stop the Bleed training of staff. We've had approximately 300 people, staff members, trained to date. That is a 2-hour training. A lot of times those folks have come in on Saturday, and if there was an active shooter or an active assailant, that trains people with applying tourniquets and stop the bleeding until first responders arrive. The 4 to 5 posters, I hope you've seen those, were created by the district to display around school campuses, advertising 3 anonymous reporting tools, the apps, the Fortify app, the Crime Stoppers, and the St. Lucie Public Schools. And principals were provided with the Fortify Florida PowerPoint to instruct staff and students on its use. So far, we've generated, it says 60 tips, but we had an additional tip come in today. So running tally of 61 tips. And in almost every instant, those were unfounded. They're not serious security risks. It's kids saying, I'm being bullied by somebody else, but we have to err on the side of caution and investigate every single one of those. The Code Red Armed Aggressor Active Assailant procedure has been revised, and you'll see that as an attachment. It's 3 pages. I'll show you a picture of it in just a minute, but it says Code Red on it, Active Assailant. And that includes the 2-page procedures in case there is an active assailant, and that's on the board agenda this evening. Emergency key boxes have been installed at the entrance of schools. That'll be concluded hopefully by July 1st, and that's for emergency responders to be able to have access to the schools through those key boxes to get into the building. The radio amplifiers, as part of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, there was an issue with different municipalities talking to one another and also being able to get radio signals into the buildings. That's all been resolved with regards to our public schools. We've installed all of those amplifiers and radio communication systems. Another thing that we're doing is if you've got a first responder, building numbers, where something is taking place. We're going to be having large numbers on our buildings, so first responders see if something's happening in Building 1. It's very, very clearly labeled Building 1, not just from the side of a building, but also from the rooftop as well. That's happening internally, and that'll be done by the beginning of the school year. We'll also have our local community law enforcement doing tours of the school so that they're familiar with the layout of the campuses so that they're ever called to respond, they know where to go. So new radios have been purchased. In addition, we talked about the signal amplifiers. Active shooter training has been conducted by the Sheriff's Office, and that includes our own safety and security personnel, and I talked about the VOLO app. I think that'll be very powerful security measure for our schools with all of our staff members if they have that app on their phones. The next slide is the Armed Aggressor Active Assailant Policy, which is Code Red. I'm certainly not going to read that to you, but it just indicates what we are to do if there is ever an active shooter. All of our principals are aware of this, how they are to respond, where they're to evacuate, where they're supposed to go. That's not on here, but the executive directors and I work with the school centers and our cabinet so that every school knows where they're going to go if they had an active shooter. And this Run, Hide, Fight poster, that's in all of our buildings, and also there is a copy in all of our rooms. So our students are very well aware of this. They've seen the PowerPoint on Run, Hide, Fight. And we also not only have this, but there's designated hard corners in every classroom so that if there is an emergency, students would know where to go to be out of the sight of a perpetrator. And I know I'm moving fast, but we've got a time limit that we're backed up on. Hardening of schools, implementation, just the single points of egress, clear signage. We're going from 4 to 6 foot fences, and I'm going to move pretty quickly because the stuff we want to get through is the grand jury. Installed cameras, visitors ID badges, enrollment forms and pupil identification forms have been updated to include the requirements for students at the time of initial registration to note referrals to mental health services, which is critically important. Aligns the work, and this is all mental health, aligns the work for our discretionary project SEDNet with the new requirements. And this is the multi-agency network for students with emotional and behavioral disabilities, works with education, mental health, child welfare, and juvenile justice professionals, along with other agencies and families to provide children with mental illness or emotional and behavior problems and their families with access to the services and supports they need to succeed. Mr. Tomlinson, that is one long sentence, and I think you wrote that. Updated. Yes, it does. We've updated the code of conduct to allow for referral for mental health services if a threat's made by a student. And also, Mr. Tomlinson submitted our mental health plan to the DOE last year. Entered into an agreement with Sandy Hook Promise for a concise training plan for the members of the school-based threat assessment teams. Participated in the Governor's Executive Order Committee meetings, which were coordinated by DCF and included DJJ, Early Learning Coalition, Managing Entity, law enforcement, and others to address the collaboration among agencies and to make recommendations to DCF to enhance communication and services among agency providers. And we've also certified 12 student services staff members as youth mental first aid trainers through the National Council. And we're wrapping up our mental health. So far, we've trained 323 employees in youth mental first aid this year, in addition to the 380 that were trained last year. And this is a big deal because it's a 7-hour training and every single employee has to do this, which is going to be very, very time consuming. We work collaboratively with the school safety specialist to ensure the requirements of Senate Bill 7026 are addressed and implemented, strengthen our mental health collaboration partnerships, entered into professional service agreements with all collaborative partners to pay for mental health services for students who do not have access to private insurance or Medicaid, and currently working with our mental health collaborative partners to add on-site mental health counselors in schools to meet the immediate needs of our students. We're working with Drug Treatment Association to expand the number of counselors in our schools to address substance abuse and use and prevention and intervention. Established a committee through the St. Lucie Executive Roundtable to specifically address barriers surrounding students accessing mental health services, and conducted district-wide training for all school-based teams in establishing a school-based system of care to meet the mental health needs of students through a tiered system of support. And we've also developed a work group through the Executive Roundtable composed of community and agency partners to address youth and violence and delinquency and to seamlessly integrate prevention programs from school to community. So now I want to get into the governor's executive order. So the governor has impaneled a grand jury, and in the executive order, it directs the Commissioner of Education and Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Justice to ensure the following objectives are completed. A statewide audit of all 67 school districts to ascertain any and all types of school-based discipline diversion programs in place to include requirements for eligibility and operations, impact on the school and public safety costs, and whether there is evidence to support continuation or closure. So we still utilize our code of conduct as a guide for expectations of student behavior, and the only program we offer for students is Project North, or Project Rock North and Project Rock South. And this is an alternative to out-of-school suspension, but is operated at an off-site location. It doesn't divert the consequences for the behavior in any way, except to offer this as an in-school suspension versus an out-of-school suspension. This program is totally voluntary as an alternative for our students. This does not apply to zero tolerance level 4 incidents or events, and Project ROCK is grant funded and has no impact on the general fund for St. Lucie Public School. Now, diversion programs, the Sheriff's Office and Port St. Lucie Police have their own diversion programs for juvenile justice, Those are called civil citations and they're for misdemeanors, but that's not part of the school district. So, let me see where I'm at. So it also directs the Commissioner of Education and the Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Justice to ensure the following objectives are completed. The Department of Education will work with the Department of Juvenile Justice to review these programs and assess them. They will also work to develop best practices. The DOE and DJJ will be assessing our programs to be submitted to the legislature by July 1st, 2019. And I've been the Deputy Superintendent, that's me, has been appointed as the liaison between St. Lucie Public Schools and the DOE regarding diversionary programs, and I have a conference call set with them and Mr. Tomlinson and myself on Friday. The DOE will reopen and extend the application period for participation in the Coach Aaron Feist Guardian Program to April 1st, 2019, and our response is we currently do not participate in this program. It also directs the Commissioner of Education and the Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Justice to ensure the following objectives are completed. The DOE will develop best practices for school hardening and harm mitigation to be submitted to the Governor by July 1st as identified by the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission report. And basically this whole presentation has been about what we've done to comply with those requirements. So I will save you from me reading this to you, but just in a nutshell, that's the response. It directs the Commissioner of Education and the Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Justice to ensure the following objectives are completed. The Commissioner of Education shall communicate to all superintendents on how to implement Safe Schools officers and guardians. And we have a law enforcement officer or deputy assigned to each of our school campuses. And thankfully to our voters, our referendum dollars will ensure that law enforcement efforts will be funded. And the DOE shall take steps to provide a centralized data repository and data analytics to include access to timely safety information by August of 2019 with support from DCF and law enforcement. And this is just to notify districts or district to district when kids transfer that we get an update on whether they've had threats made in the past so that districts are communicating with each other. Now lastly, the statewide grand jury was impaneled, and this is important because of CESA reporting. So the grand jury is going to examine whether refusal or failure to follow the mandates of school-related safety laws, such as the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act, results in unnecessary and avoidable risks to students across the state. And we're adhering to all of the requirements of the law. And our highest priority is to keep our students safe. Now, there's also an issue about whether public entities committed and continue to commit fraud and deceit by accepting state funds conditioned on implementation of certain safety measures while knowingly fail to act. And we allocate our dollars strictly in accordance with how the law determines that they be spent. They're earmarked for that. Next is whether school officials committed and continue to commit fraud and deceit by mismanaging, failing to use and diverting funds from multi-million-dollar bonds specifically solicited for school safety initiatives, and we currently have no bonds solicited for school safety initiatives. Whether officials, and this is really the most important part of this, whether school officials violated and continue to violate state law by systematically underreporting incidents of criminal activity to the Department of Education. So we report all of our assessor violations to the DOE as we're required in all survey reporting periods. Deans of students and discipline officers undergo extensive training and appropriate coding infractions based on our disciplinary matrix. And the next page I'm going to show you is what I'm talking about with regards to assessor. So this chart or this table shows you the kind of things that are reported to law enforcement. On the left hand, starting with weapons, 26, battery, 34, drug use, possession, 72. All of those are reported to the state as violations of the law, okay? On the right-hand side is whether or not the resource officer decided to write a report, okay? Whether there was enough credibility to it to actually generate a report. On the left is what is reported to the law. So what I would submit to you as we look at a couple of other districts, St. Lucie Public Schools differs on the side of caution, okay, with regards to what we're reporting to law enforcement. And I'm not going to say that we're over-reporting, but we are deferring on the side of caution because law enforcement is not deeming what we're reporting to be, a lot of it to be worthy of doing a police report on. And if I take you to the next page, and remember, only if there's a police report, if the law enforcement takes action, does something happen with the student. It's just if there's a threat or intimidation or bullying, those automatically get reported to the state, but very few of those actually gets picked up by law enforcement. But if you look at Lake and Seminole County, and I'd especially go back to threats and intimidation, where we had 261, Lake County had 106, and Seminole had 143. I think that gives you an example of how a lot of our deans and discipline officers will err on the side of caution just to get a law enforcement officer involved, just to make sure there's no threat or harm to the student. So, in finality, the petition for order to impanel a statewide grand jury. There's a need to examine the crimes and wrongs that precipitated the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting and that even now result in unsafe schools across the state. There's also a need to examine the responses of public entities to laws designed to protect schools, such as the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. The jurisdiction of the statewide grand jury shall extend through the state to investigate crimes, return indictments, make presentments, or direct issuance of reports and otherwise perform all functions of a statewide grand jury with regard to the offenses. The grand jury will examine the crimes and wrongs that precipitated the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas school shooting and that result in unsafe schools across the state, and the responses of public entities to laws designed to protect schools, such as the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. And I won't read the rest. I'll just close it. If the board has any questions, and my closing remarks would be, the superintendent, all of us that work for public schools, I think student safety is our number one priority. As a principal, if kids don't feel safe, they can't perform. You always want to make sure your schools are safe and you want to protect your kids. Unfortunately, a lot of times we always thought about protecting our schools from within and not protecting our schools from the outside. And we're in a different time now, and it's not if school shooting is going to happen, but when. But I do believe, on behalf of St. Lucie Public Schools and our employees, we've done a lot to mitigate the harm that could potentially be caused by an event like this happening in one of our schools. And with that, I'll open to questions or comments from the superintendent.
Question came to me about what the charter schools are doing and how much of that falls under St. Lucie County Public Schools, or if they report directly to the state the way that we do.
They have their own safety plans just like we do, but they fall under our purview, but they have their own board of governors there when it comes to all of them have a resource officer, but we treat them just like any other public schools with regards to the safety of their kids. They're accountable. Well, we'd like to think that they're accountable to the public, but they have a safety plan, but that's not necessarily, we don't have control over that.
In the reporting of discipline, especially in Senate Bill 730 this year, that you'll see that charter schools they're not exempt from any of the reporting requirements, so they're mandated to report just like any other public school within the jurisdiction.
The question being, yes, they have to report and all that. They send it directly to the Office of Choice in Tallahassee? Or do they send that to us?
They use our system in Skyward for reporting discipline. They have to use our system.
All of them do?
Mhm.
Okay.
So we're monitored on the funds that come to us, correct? The funds that come to us for security, and they are monitored in the same way, how we use the funds that are given by the state?
dollars that come down for, there'll be mental health dollars, and then there'll be and there's the SRO dollars. So they get a portion of that. So we give that to them. Now, two of the charters hired sheriff's department folks, and then they pick whatever their allocation was from the state, then they picked up whatever the shortfall was. One stayed with PSL, so they get those dollars. Mental health-wise, I think all of them fall under our,
Only two of them chose to come in under us.
okay?
The
Only two of
Renaissance
them.
schools came in
That's what I was
under
gonna
us.
say.
And Somerset schools chose to do their own mental health plan, so they took their own dollars. The Renaissance schools both operate under our mental health plan, and we provide services to their children.
So I think what Mrs. Hilson's asking then, what assurances do we have that they're spending the dollars that they pass through us and go there?
They would fall under the audit requirements now.
And then they
from
would
the
be
state.
audited, yeah.
If we find out that they are not, this is going on, anecdotal information, how about that, Carol? If we find out that they indeed are not, who is held accountable? Are we held accountable, or are their board members held accountable?
I don't know that I can answer that question,
Well,
but
you don't have to,
but-
but that's something we need to be
we're
cognizant of,
the
because that is,
sponsor of the charter schools in essence.
okay.
It's a collaborative effort that we must work together with them. Even in the discussions that came to the mental health plan, we had to have those discussions with the charter school to iron out exactly what they were doing. In all of the training that we do, I absolutely make sure that the charter schools are invited to participate in any of the discipline training so that we can demonstrate that we've provided the same opportunities for them as any other school within the district.
Last one. You guys still with me? Hanging in there? Remember, we got a board meeting later. We just want to take a moment here because we did talk, and probably it would have been better just to do these back to back, and I apologize, we didn't. But because of the issues, the students that are being referred to Delcassans, particularly the younger students, it's created a space issue. We already have an area, we have officers there, we have folks there, but so we have a proposal to present to the board at this time, and then to get your feedback on that. Dr. Wild.
Okay, good afternoon again. Yes, first, just to remind everybody that Delcassans has multiple purposes. It currently serves as both an alternative school and an ESE center of sorts. We serve grades K through 12 for ESE services for students that need the most restrictive environment, and we serve grades 4 through 12 in alternative education. We've had to add those elementary grades over time. Alternative education there includes students that are assigned there in lieu of expulsion. Those are the students that are on a stipulated order. We have students assigned there for behavior incidents on a district contract or through a voluntary assignment. And we have middle school acceleration program for academic recovery there called the MAP program. We are actually seeing so many changes, and needs are coming to our attention in terms of having enough space on that campus to deal with the referrals that are coming forward. Also, more and more, we're seeing an increased need for placement for younger students below 4th grade for serious incidents, such as bringing a weapon, where we are bound by law as to what we have to do in terms of placement, and not having any alternative site for grades K through 3 in those incidents has become more and more of a problem. We're not talking in large numbers, but when it happens to any student and we don't have a good alternative, then we have an issue. We are also needing to increase the capacity for secondary students. When we get filled up, we really cannot take voluntary placements. Voluntary placements are students that are getting in trouble, insignificant trouble, not necessarily level 4 offenses, so they might not come to placement review, but they're looking for a better setting to meet their needs, so a discipline alternative. So we've run out of space to be able to do that. And then we do have a concern with some of our youngest students riding the buses with some of our most troubled teenage youth. And so our solution that we're going to propose would help mitigate, minimize that problem. I've been working with a team of people that includes Bill Tomlinson, Sonny Booker, Ellen Harden, and then as we came along with some solutions, Terrence O'Leary and Marty Sanders have been involved as well. And our proposed solution is to create a satellite campus for Dalcassans, specifically to house the elementary students that are there alternatively or for ESE services. We're talking about a very small satellite site, and our proposal is to use one academic wing at Garden City, the newer buildings that are in the back. Our intent is to keep it very small and very contained. With that, we were looking at that location because it already has a cafeteria that is operational. That site does prepare food for our other satellite sites, for Alpi and for catering. So it's ideal, it's already got that in place. The elementary staff that currently work with those students at Dalcassans would relocate and offer their services there. The non-classroom support, such as the mental health counselors, would be on a rotating basis. The students would still get all of those services. One assistant principal would move over there to oversee that campus, and we would be adding a health paraprofessional because some of those students have significant medical needs and medication and so forth. Currently, that building is being used by Alpi. They have several academic wings, the library, and the front office. In that particular building, it's currently being used for adults only. They don't have classrooms held in those buildings right now. Our next steps would be to, you want me to stop? Go ahead.
So this building is going to be opened up for 4th graders and 5th graders?
Our proposal is that this one building would be K through 5.
Okay,
K through 5.
that makes me feel better.
Yeah, K through 5, ESE, and alternative.
And ESE, but I was focusing on 4th and 5th grade.
Yes.
Okay. K through 5, okay, gotcha.
Right. So the next steps for this plan would be to continue to meet with Alpi. They're in their negotiation for the lease agreement as it is. We did share this idea with them, and we need to problem solve around making sure that the space left meets their needs. Also developing a shared facility use plan so that our students would not be mingling with their students or any other use of that building at this point. We would also have to create our staff and student schedules, more specifically. And we met with Don Carter, Terrence and I did, to talk about transportation and how we would do that. Of course, with these students are assigned throughout the year, so you never know the transportation plan for the whole year. But he's aware that that would be our goal. Oh. And, sorry, last slide, I went too fast there. We believe that by separating the students onto their own campus and keeping it contained in such a manner, we'll create an environment that is more conducive to the elementary learners that we're talking about. Remove some influences that they interact with now. They would not be interacting with those older children. It would allow us to open up seats when we do need to place a 3rd grader or a 2nd grader for some of their escalating behaviors or for weapons. It would utilize an existing facility where food service is already there. It's not very far from Dalcassans, and it would open up some seats at Dalcassans for our increased needs. So that is the proposal. Do you have any other additional questions?
So you're saying that it would be a school for K to 5 to deal with the ESE students, the alternative education students, and and what else that we have here? And
That's
ESE,
it. The ESE K through 5 and the alternative ed K through 5.
So Dalcassans would be 6 through 12 then?
Right. This would be a satellite of Dalcassans, but it would not be on the same property.
What does our contract look like with Alfie?
What does it look like?
Is it like a 5-year contract or in the
It's-
middle of it?
it's up right
That's what
now.
I thought, 5, and it's up for renewal?
It's up for renewal.
Yeah, I just remember that is a St. Lucie County school, and we should be able to use it the way we see fit, unfortunately.
Yes, and they have, we just met with Alpi, and they've experienced this before in other districts and here, and they know that. We're just trying to be good partners and make sure we give them a facility that's appropriate for the preschool population that they have, and that we work out a good schedule for
I
not
appreciate it,
not letting
but
them.
again, you know,
No, I
our students
appreciate
come
that.
first, and
Yes.
we support you in that.
Be what Sunrise Academy was, those same rooms, or it's a different wing? What we used for Sunrise Academy? No, okay,
This is just one academic wing.
okay.
We're not intending to do a big alternative site or a separate school.
No, I'm just saying the rooms that we're going to use are what we used for what? It's not, okay.
Okay.
It's in the back.
It's in the back. It's the center building in the back.
So could Head Start also be there? Is there space enough for us to be, as long as they do the lunch schedules according, to keep the
Yes.
kids separate? So it's doable to allow them to stay, right?
They just have to relocate the people that are currently using those classrooms as offices. So it's moving their adults either to shared or into the front office. They've got adults in there using it for offices at this point.
So the other offices that are already there, will they stay there? The community offices, those will still remain, they're not going to impact it? Okay.
Correct, that's a separate section of the building. How would it be what? I'm sorry. Yes, that would be part of our shared plan. They currently prepare the food for those students now. All the details on the time schedule, we would have to work that out with them. That's one of our next steps. Yeah, we feel it's very doable.
You guys have to remember, that school did run 750 students at one time.
Correct.
So, I mean, that this is not,
Yes. But these classrooms are in
front
great.
building's old.
The front building is. These are the
but
newer
the rest
buildings.
of them are fairly new.
Yeah, these are the newer
No,
buildings in
modern.
the back, and they're in great shape. They are. And they have elementary bathrooms. That is,
Yeah,
Media center. Okay.
just the elevators don't work well.
and this is first floor only. Thank you.
I'm kidding.
Madam Chair, if I could, Del Casson seems to be a big topic today, so I want to read this to you. The Del Casson students went to Universal's over the weekend, Universal Studio, and this was the call we got from management. They were unaware that Del Casson's was an alternative school. The representative told me that they were the first alternative school to attend an event. The employees of the night stated that that the students made a lasting impression because the children were respectful and courteous. The Universal team members and security were so impressed with our children, they invited us back for next year. And then the kids were identified because they had a T-shirt that said Dale on it. And the kids were calm, well-behaved, better than regular schools that were in attendance. And the conversation ended with these words: "Your school has changed our eyesight of alternative ed and behavior." I wanted to share this great news with you. So I was hoping Sunny would have been here to hear that.
Yes, thank you.
But
And our plan would be to implement this as the new school year
yes, ma'am,
starts.
when school starts next year.
How many students does Del Casson allow for?
Last time I
building.
checked, it had 248 students there, but that number changes every day. We had 22 students at placement review today, so I don't know the current number.
Not the current number of students, but the size of the facility, how
Capacity.
many students can it hold?
About 248, yes.
Right, that's packed.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned already, but I missed it, at Garden City, how many would we hold there?
At Garden City, we would have room for growth. It's a 10-classroom building. We expect to have between 60 and 80 students.
Okay.
It would start a little lower than that and have room for additions.
Thank you, Ms. Wells.
Then we need another SRO.
I'll take care of it.
Fully support.
Last item that I have, and I'll go very, very quickly, I gave you all a copy of the resolution that the county did regarding the half-cent sales tax. We had, we're going to have an oversight committee as well, and I think everybody has it. If you have it, okay. And I just wanted you to be able to take I'm sorry for giving it to you today, but if you can, on page where it says at the very bottom, it says Section 2, Memberships and Qualifications, and it talks about they have a 7-committee member and one alternate, and then it lists the criteria there. A member shall be a resident of St. Lucie County. 1 member shall be appointed by each member of the Board of County Commissioners. I would like to say school board. Where it says 2 members shall be appointed at large, I want to come back to that in just a moment. At-large members shall serve a term of 4 years. Members shall not be elected officials, or where it says county staff members, I would supplement district employees. And then, in essence, what I would recommend to the board, and then we're going to have a quick conversation, would be that each one of the board members would select a member from the community to serve on the oversight committee, and that person in the weeds in the language would serve out whatever your term is. The at-large person would serve a 4-year term. There would also be a CTA representative on there, or a CTA. They would select somebody. I'm assuming it would be I don't know who that would be, but they would have a selection. So we would have the 5 board members and the CTA. If you have an odd number of 7, because you don't want to get too big, then that would then have 1 at-large member from the community, and then have a committee of 7, just like the county would have. The other alternative would be to go up to 9 members, but then that gets large, and you can talk about quorums. I would recommend staying at 7, and then let legal team and everybody do this up, and then bring it back to you for approval at a board meeting. And but it would be just really follow this and put our language in there where it's needed to be for the school district, so we'd be consistent. And the dollars will not be distributed anyway or be coming to the county, to us anytime, probably in November or December after the taxes. So this is something that there's not a rush whatsoever, but I'd like to get, I'd like to really bring it to you in June and be done with it so that it's out there, and then we can notify that. And then also, we'd like to follow up. We also right now have a Citizens Budget Advisory Committee, and I'm not so certain that we need that right now, in all honesty. With this in place, is watching the referendum dollars. I would recommend to the board that we just dissolve that at this time, and if there was a need to bring it back, we would. We very rarely meet. When we do, we have a very difficult time having a quorum there. There really hasn't been any major issues that have come before the board that I'm aware of in the 4 years that I've been here that have been anywhere at all controversial regarding the way the dollars are spent. And I don't want to have committees, we're transparent, we're open, everyone knows that. So I'm going to throw that out there as well, and we can either, you give me a green light today, or you can give me a red light.
I think we should send a thank you for your service letter to each member of the current Citizens Budget Committee, and move on with what we need to do with our referendum oversight.
And I think it's equally important that we put the team in place, because we said we were going to do it, and all of us are getting questions, who's going to be on it, and are you really going to do it? And so I think it's time to let the committee be in place, and when the dollars roll in, then they're ready to roll too.
Okay.
And I would also ask that we look into some, and I know we need to look for folks that have expertise in these areas, but to have some form of a training for those members.
Absolutely. Oh, you would do training. Are they under the sunshine? Okay, they would be under sunshine. So we would do that. We would do the training for them and exactly what needs to be done. You caught the part I skipped it about. They talked about for the county, environment and engineering, those things. I think ours could be, it could be educational, or we can. If there's certain language you want to see, just say what that would be.
I agree. I just think an overall training for them would be part
would
of
do
their
that.
commitment to serve on that task
Okay,
force.
and then my goal would be to bring this back to you at the June meeting in a month from today. And
And at large, I would think that past history would show that it's been beneficial to have administration have a seat at the table because of the access to all the information. So maybe we have the at-large person being appointed by the superintendent.
I didn't hear the last part. They'd be,
You get to appoint the at-large.
okay. Or they could apply. I mean, I'm open. To me, it doesn't really matter. Because when we went out and campaigned, we talked about that citizens could offer, so what we would do now, when we bring it back, then we would use our communications department to get that word out for them to contact board members to make them aware. Then you would make your selection. We would, we would have then maybe a few more that are there that haven't been, and can make a recommendation. I can make a recommendation to the board on that, and we'd have the CTA representative there. And there's not I don't think there's any kind of a rush for that. We've got the summer to do that and go into the new year with that in place, because whatever they're going to be looking at, in all honesty, the community is going to see it as well, because we're going to have it posted on our website.
Correct.
Where, this minute millions went here, this went there, that went there. So it's, we'll be very transparent to it. Not only to the entire community will see everything that we're doing.
For me, I think all 5 of us would be good, but CTA, not CUA or CWA?
However they want to do it, they got one.
Only reason why I ask is because this committee's for citizens, and they're going to pick someone from the community, obviously. But then they also have to go negotiate, too. Set that dollar amount, and then negotiate with the union.
The dollar amount, we're going to begin negotiations here in a few weeks. We'll do a meeting with the board, and then we'll go forward with that.
Okay, so the dollar amount will already be negotiated.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
then,
all they do, this is just oversight. They have no say
Okay,
in how this
because I
is
thought
spent. They're
they
just
were.
to make sure that we spent it where
Oh, I
we
don't
said
have any
we were
problem
going to
then.
spend it.
Nope. Don't have any problem. Anyway, we want to do it. Sorry. I just know how committees work, and when you got 2 or 3, that's sometimes quorum.
Well, I will call us back in. I think we've discussed.
One other point that
Okay.
Mr. Ingersoll did bring up, so we can delay the meeting for a moment. The language, the language that will be in there as well that you'll see will be, the only difference that I would see from the county perspective is, and I'm glad you said what you said, any decisions or recommendations that would be made by the entire committee and not a quorum. Because if you had a quorum, you could just have 4 people making that determination. And that language will be in there, and Dan Harrell and I talked about that yesterday, so that whatever it is would be from the entire crew. So it would be, it
Why I
represents.
say that is because the Citizens Budget Committee can get railroaded and has been railroaded in the past over substitute pay and some other things that, 3 people made, you got 2 union people and nothing against it, but lo and behold, I see something come around and I'm like, how in the world did that happen? And that's how those decisions came about. So, I just want to.
We've made it very clear during our campaigning that the dollars will be accounted for and that nothing will be turned or changed. And that's what we need to stick with as a board, that there's no substituting dollars here or substituting there.
Yes, ma'am.
Controversy-free.
That's all I'm asking.
It will be.
Other comments, board members? If not, we will adjourn this meeting and meet back here at 5 for the regular scheduled meeting.